It's documentary week on Back to the Movies. We are talking Taxi to the Dark Side and King of Kong, A Fistful of Quarters.
I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do drugs. I play video games.
We're going back to the movies. 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 Yeah.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Back to the Movies, the silver screen time machine where we travel back to a specific year of cinema history and explore what made it special. This season, we're going back to the year 2007. I'm your host, Ben, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Nat McGee. Nat, how's it going?
It's going. I'm living in isolation this week, just like the protagonist in I Am Legend. Jesse went away for a full week to visit some friends and family. I'm here with my dog, and I might be going a little crazy.
You got your mannequin set up?
The mannequins are set up in the back, and I've been talking to them daily. It keeps me going. I returned Shrek.
You put your Goodfellas DVD in your gun cabinet?
Yep. No, it's been nice. I am a disciple of Thoreau, and I feel really great being here in the woods all by myself. How are you, Ben?
Not bad. It was the start of my fiance's summer break this week, and we have been making the most of it. We had a busy Father's Day weekend, seeing lots of family, going to the movies. I did it.
Ooh, we'll talk about that in a moment. I can't wait. Yeah, man, it's summer's here and it's cracking. And I wanted to ask you, did you take a look at my shirt that I'm wearing that our listeners can't see?
The resolution is too bad. I can't make out any of the words.
Well, it's a t-shirt from the restaurant Punjabi Tandoor that I bought.
Oh,
it's
shit.
The Indian restaurant that we used to go to in Anaheim, California when we were in college. It's like the only fast food Indian place I've ever been to that's like really good.
God,
You
it was
just
so
go
good.
in, pay $10 and get like a full Indian meal. So I'm pretty happy to be wearing this shirt in your presence because I know you like that restaurant a lot.
I really did. That really introduced me to Indian food because you just go and I couldn't read the menu and I didn't know what anything was. So I just point to things in the glass fronted cabinet and I'd wind up with different food all the time and it was always delicious.
That's how you learn though. That's, you don't have to learn the names. It's not like you go to fine wine class. You go and you just look at the stuff and you're like, that looks good. I'll put that in my mouth.
It's like when they do language immersion, but for eating, which means it's right up my alley.
Exactly. I love that. Before we talk about these documentaries, we would just like to ask our listeners, be you a longtime listener or first-time listener, please give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It helps grow the podcast. And I got to be honest, we kind of need to do like a pledge drive or something because I don't think we've gotten a new 5-star review in a minute, Ben. I think we need to get some celebrities on the phones calling people. But yeah, guys, if you haven't given us a 5-star review, please do. It'll feed our souls. You can follow us on social media at BttM Pod on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And you can also email us, bttmpod@gmail.com. With that, let's talk a little bit about what we personally watched this week, other than the two docs that we're going to talk about. Ben, you went to the movie theater.
I went to the movies.
What'd
Back
you
to
see?
the movies. I saw In the Heights on your recommendation. And
Did
what
you
a
enjoy it?
time at the movies that was. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You know, there had some minor nitpicks with the film itself, but in the moment, I was just so overjoyed to be having that experience.
Yeah, it's a good one to come back to. If someone hasn't seen it, I recommend going to see it in the theater because it's awesome. And it is funny. Like, I feel like it's because of the fact that it's like the only movie worth talking about that's out right now because everything else is pretty much garbage. I feel like it's catching a lot of shit in different ways. Like, people are really criticizing like the story, they're criticizing the songs, they're criticizing everything. There's obviously the scandal about the lack of Afro-Latino actors, which like is a valid criticism. This movie is catching a lot of shit. And like, I still had a really good time watching it. Like, I wasn't sitting there like, ugh, God, I want it to end.
People are always harder on movies that, come close but fail to meet their expectations than the ones that don't even try.
But like, do any movies meet everyone's singular expectation anymore? Because everyone has a podcast, everyone has a Twitter handle, everyone has a critical platform. So like, any movie that's worth talking about, I feel like gets so hammered with criticism that it like kind of it dilutes the strength of the movie within it being out in like 3 or 4 days.
One of the movies we're talking about today is the rare 100% on Rotten Tomatoes.
That's pretty awesome. And I can see why, because it's really good. But yeah, that's also a different type of movie from a very different time, even 14 years ago.
Let me tell you, other than the movie itself, my favorite thing about being back in the theater was seeing all the posters on the walls of all the upcoming films, because it was the promise of more to come. I always love walking down the hallway and looking at all the coming soon posters. There was one poster in particular that really caught my eye. In big letters, bigger than the title, bigger than the actors, it said, "In theaters, finally." Do you know what movie that was for?
Was it for Black Widow?
Peter Rabbit 2.
Hey, some little 8-year-old was probably thrilled.
I love them calling their shot like that. They're like, yes, the one you've all been waiting for all pandemic, James Corden's Peter Rabbit 2.
It's back. It's like Terminator 2. Dun, 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 dun.
What did you watch this week, Nat?
I have a funny story, actually. So I went back to New York this past weekend, and my good friend Cinephile Davide and I decided that we were going to go to the Tribeca Shorts Festival. And they had an outdoor theater that they conceived of during COVID. And I got to be honest, like, COVID is like basically over in New York. The only place that people are all wearing their masks is on the subway. Everywhere else, like, they're acting like it's normal. So it's like noon on Sunday, and Sunday was the summer the summer equinox. It was a really hot day. It was like 95 degrees, and Tribeca Film Festival had set up a screening on the pier where Leonardo DiCaprio throws the lobsters at the guy in Wolf of Wall Street where his yacht is parked. It was that place. And they just have all these seats that are potted off. So it's like individual little sets of seats, either 2 or 4, no armrests. They're just like event chairs. The screen was nice. It was a really nice screen. It was really loud and bright and you could see everything, but it was like 95 degrees. And we're sitting down and we're like, immediately like, I don't know, man. I don't know. And they start up the screening with like 17 corporate sponsor advertisements, which Tribeca Film Festival does. Like, they're sponsored by Apple, they're sponsored by everyone. So we literally watched an iPad ad in the scorching heat, and then the first movie came on. The filmmakers were in the audience because this is the world premiere of this movie. They like were a couple and they kissed right as the movie started, and I was like, man, this would be pretty nice if like we weren't in the searing heat right now. And we were just like looking at each other, and that movie lasted 10 minutes. It was like a little documentary about a yoga school in Baltimore. And like Davide and I just looked at each other and we're like, let's get the fuck out of here. We're done. And we shamefully walked out after 10 minutes of documentary and like 25 minutes of corporate ads. So that was the big story. We ended up seeing one 10-minute documentary.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it was funny. And now we've been sending each other like accounts of sun torture in history where people have been like forced to sit out in the sun. So that's kind of apt for one of the movies that we're going to be talking about. And I'm going to try not to make too light of the subject anymore. That was my one zinger, because it's a really heavy movie that we're going to be discussing. And I'm sure that you're going to bring the gravitas, as you always do in serious situations. And I appreciate that, because honestly, I don't think I'm equipped to just talk about this movie by myself.
I don't know how I'm going to talk about this movie. I suppose we should get right into it. The film we're referring to is Taxi to the Dark Side.
Taxi to the Dark Side. It is a documentary. It's about torture, specifically torture done by the United States in the Iraq-Afghanistan conflict, right? More or less?
Yeah, it's about how the treatment of detainees that were made famous by the scandals at Abu Ghraib and then Guantanamo Bay actually represented an entire system of military circumvention of the law that was employed across the theaters of war at that time for no benefit or gain and to the detriment of everyone involved, not least of which were the victims, such as the Afghan taxi driver Dilawar, who is sort of the reference of the title.
I'm assuming most people listening to this either saw it a long time ago and like haven't rewatched it since. So this is going to be some heavy stuff. We're going to be talking about all that stuff that Ben just mentioned. The second movie that we're talking about is a little more lighthearted. So if you're not interested in hearing us talk about this heavy subject matter, there should be a timestamp and you can fast forward. But if you want to join us on this journey, I think it's going to be interesting to talk about.
And before we do that, I do want to kind of set something up as a through line for this episode. These two documentaries feel very distinct from each other. It's almost whiplash inducing to go from one to the other. But I also think that they nicely represent kind of the two major microcosms of documentary filmmaking.
Absolutely. Especially at that time.
Yeah.
And you know what's funny about you say it's whiplash? I watched them back to back.
I did too.
Last night I watched Taxi to the Dark Side, and then in like an hour later I watched King of Kong, and kind of glad I did, to be honest. It was a great double feature because it healed me a little bit from the horrors of Taxi to the Dark Side.
It really was cathartic to experience it afterwards. And what a complete picture of the United States in 2007.
It really is. Yeah. Yeah, you got your foreign and your domestic, and it's insane the differences.
So the one I was referring to a minute ago, I think documentaries often fall into two camps, where you have some that are about education or advocacy. You know, they're about drawing attention to a political issue or to an underknown event of historical importance. They are the most common form of documentary that gains attention, right? Because they're issue documentaries.
Yeah.
I think Paris is Burning is a pretty great example of this, right? You know, there was this whole world that was being underrepresented. Although I guess it bridges the two. Maybe I'll cut this entire sentence out because it doesn't.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I actually think Paris is Burning is the opposite. I think Paris is Burning is way more of the second
King of Kong,
the King of Kong style,
the stranger than fiction.
Yeah, and also just like any documentary is going to be educating you about something, be it a world you didn't know about, or a person that you didn't know about, or a person that you thought you knew, and now you're learning a different side. So, because like that's just what it is. I feel like the big difference is like you're either on the scene following an event like as it's happening, or you're putting it together via interviews and footage afterwards. And you can mix those two as well. Like obviously King of Kong has a little bit of, you know, archival footage and stuff. But I think that that's sort of the dichotomy between these two movies. One of them is about something that happened and they're interviewing people, and another one, the filmmaker was like on the ground as it happened.
Right.
So
that's also a really good framework to look at these from, because I hadn't even thought about that, but that's totally true. And it informs so much about the way the two movies took shape, where Taxi to the Dark Side kind of existed as a complete idea as it went into production, but King of Kong was found once production had finished, when they were in post.
Yeah.
They didn't even know what movie they were going to make. But I think there is a distinction also to be made between a documentary whose primary goal is to educate you on an issue so that you can respond to it in some way in the real world.
Yeah.
Which is definitely something Taxi to the Dark Side wants to do. Versus something like King of Kong, which is educating you about the world of competitive gaming, but it doesn't think you're going to use that information in any particular way. It's more interested in the narrative power of that story.
Unless you're a huge nerd and you want to go argue over Donkey Kong scores.
And you'd never heard of Twin Galaxies, and now you're like, now I know where to go.
Yeah. No, you're totally right that, like, yeah, I honestly, like, King of Kong reminds me more of, like, a movie, like a fictional movie.
Totally.
Whereas Taxi to the Dark Side reminds me of, like, something you'd watch at school, like education film. So, two sides of the same documentary coin. But let's talk about the historical context. We're going to forego the story minute because I'm not going to sit here and summarize what happened in the Iraq War with the torture. I mean, it was kind of illuminating to me. Like I had never had it like sat down in front of me. I got to be honest, like we are children of this era or teenagers, and like when you're a teenager, you're just selfish. You don't know what from what. You don't know what's important. So like this was just part of the noise of being a teenager, like that this happened.
And Dillawar's death happened in 2002 or 2003. We were 12 or 13 years old when that happened.
Right. Yeah, but the big thing was the Abu Ghraib. We were like 15 years old, and we were just so in this. At least the two of us, we come from very liberal areas, liberal backgrounds, and like I personally was just like so in the soup of just like 9/11 and fuck Bush and fuck this war and torture now, and like it just like all melded together into one ununderstandable situation that was like way bigger than my comprehension of the world, and still is way bigger than my comprehension. But I don't know. It was just a very messy time and a very confusing time to be that age with those voices screaming
Absolutely.
about the situation.
And I think so much of the political debate surrounding torture, surrounding treatment of the military, surrounding the wars in Iraq is born out of how confusing that conflict was for our national character and for everyone, regardless of your age.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it would be useful for our discussion to just kind of lay out in a very condensed way what the documentary is about and how it works, even for people who've seen it before.
Sure,
just so that
yeah.
way when we reference things in it.
I mean, it starts with a story of a guy named Dilawar who was this... Where was he at? In Afghanistan?
He's in Afghanistan.
Yeah, he was in Afghanistan, and he lived on a farm with his family, but he got possession of a taxi, and to make extra money, he would drive people around in the taxi, and somehow he got picked up and taken to a detention center run by Americans, and this is in the wake of 9/11. Like, this is Afghanistan 2002. And in this detention center, he was bound and hit and sleep deprived and tortured for 5 days in order to get information that the Americans thought he may have had. And he ended up dead after being exposed to this horrible, horrible torture. Kind of like a show trial went on of like the perpetrators, the prison guards at this facility, but it slowly came out that in actuality, like these were like direct orders. Like the exact methods of tortures were direct orders from the people in charge, and the people in charge of the people in charge, going all the way up the ladder to the White House.
And if they weren't direct orders, then they were part of a deliberate strategy of pressure and ambiguity to achieve this result with plausible deniability,
Yes.
with legal protection.
And then the movie kind of delves a little bit into Guantanamo Bay and what was going on over there, and also the Abu Ghraib situation where photos came out of detainees being humiliated in varying degrees. So the movie just kind of covers that whole situation, and it is really effective and really well laid out in the movie.
And I think what the movie's primary function and what made it special in 2007 was it was trying to make the argument very vociferously and clearly that these were not isolated incidents, that these were not a few bad apples, that this was a systemic problem with policies in the U.S. military and in the White House.
Yeah.
And even 13 years later, that part of it is still really impactful. You know, when Vice came out 2 years ago.
Yeah, Cheney movie.
Yeah, it got a lot of shit. I thought it was not great, but also not terrible. And it seemed to be trying to make this argument that was like, yeah, I know the Trump years are bad, but don't forget how bad the Bush years were. Yeah. This documentary does that so much more powerfully than the kind of smug sensibility of Vice ever did.
Dude, I was blown away by the scenes in this movie where they show like Bush trying to be like a tough guy. Cause like we have forgotten about that. It was like all about like the Bushisms and how he's an idiot and how he's like a dummy and just kind of a goofball or whatever. And like there's these clips of him basically acting like a mafia boss. He's like Tony Soprano. He's like, we're gonna get him. Like he's like so trying to be this puffed chest tough guy. And it's unbelievable.
And it creates the sense of like a callous disregard for the human cost.
Yeah. And like, I know those clips are out there, but it's just weird to see them side by side and like in this context. Cause like it's one thing to see Bush say that like in a speech and not see the actual cost like 2 seconds later. But man, to see the photos and visuals from this torture and then to see this dude, this old guy in a suit acting like he's a hitman or something, it's really distressing. And I had kind of erased it from my memory.
Distressing is such a great word for the documentary as a whole, too, because it's just everything about it, from the content to the style, is designed to upset you.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. They really make it like everything is super dark. It's like the whole movie got turned on like night mode. Like when you put your phone on night mode and it inverses all the colors, like that's what this movie looks like. Every graphic is like black with like a little bit of white and like desaturated images. And the music is really tonal
and rough, unpleasant textures and sound design.
And they also show everything.
Yeah.
All the gory details from the photos of these detainees.
I don't think I had ever seen all of the photos, like that many photos from Abu Ghraib, because I had seen the ones that they printed in the newspapers, which didn't include like the graphic nudity.
Right. There's a couple striking ones that made it to the newspapers, but also did not have the graphic nudity. And to see it here, it's just like, man, that's really, really gross and upsetting.
So the guy behind this documentary is a guy named Alex Gibney. And when this comes out, he is already like a super established player in the world of documentaries. In 2005, he released Enron, The Smartest Guys in the Room, which had gained a huge amount of buzz, had gotten a Best Documentary nom at the Oscars, and is a great film. Another great film about a national scandal. He's just, he approaches the form from a very artistic level. Like, he is a filmmaker first who makes documentaries. So he does them about real subjects, but he's not afraid to push the stylistic elements to support the narrative.
I really enjoyed The Inventor, the movie about Elizabeth Holmes. That was a great one. He also did a Trump pandemic movie in the last year that came out like really quickly. So he's
I did see ads for that, but I didn't see that one.
Yeah, he's fast. How do we talk about this movie, Ben? What are we gonna say?
It's a tough movie to talk about. I don't think there's much productive use in debating or discussing the film's arguments. They are what they are. It's a very painful discussion to be had, and one that can stir up controversy even today.
I'll say this. Everyone they interviewed who has some sort of involvement in this happening, everyone looks terrible. Everyone looks so haunted by what they've seen or what they've been exposed to or what they've done. And that killed me almost as much as like the photos of the torture, just like what it does to these people. Because there's that one guy, he is this big, fat, bald guy. He's a torturer, basically. He's an enhanced interrogation specialist. I forget his name.
He was part of the military intelligence unit, and his job was to just shout at people and be scary.
Yeah, he's just a super intimidating dude. And they show pictures of him like 5 years earlier in Afghanistan. And he's like a fit dude. He looks tough, and he's got like his PMC gear on or whatever, and he looks like a Call of Duty operator. And then it cuts to this guy in his interview, and he's like, 400 pounds. And he just looks so miserable. It really struck me like, wow, not only have people died and people like it's like such a visual representation of like what war and torture can do to a person in like the span of like 3 years, 4 years. Because this guy also like he got like convicted of
court-martialed.
He was acquitted.
He was one of the only ones to be like acquitted on all kinds, but they were court-martialed, they were discharged, and a lot of them went to prison.
Yeah,
for months, for years.
But then it's like all these guys went to prison, and then it cuts to Cheney being like, "We're gonna torture anyone that needs to be tortured." Like it's really,
Cheney
really
on
crazy.
A radio show like 6 months before the movie comes out, being like, "It was absolutely justified. I would do it again."
It's so bad.
The interviews that I think are astounding, and I would watch an entire movie that was just interviews with this guy, are the ones of the detainee.
Yes, the British guy who got detained. I wasn't sure how he got detained. Did they think he was part of like a terror cell or something?
I don't know if they specified. I can't remember. He had been in Bagram with Dilawar is kind of the through line. Like he had seen Dilawar during that week while Dilawar
that's
was
what it
there.
was. Yeah, it's interesting because being exposed to media and being exposed to this war for the last 20 years, you get used to seeing guys like the guys at the beginning of this movie who are talking about Dilawar, who English is not their language. They're, not the most like well spoken to an American audience to like explain the horrors of what happened to them. This guy is an articulate British man who
He's more articulate than the American soldiers.
Yeah, he's a very articulate person, and he's able to just tell us exactly what he felt and how it was in perfect English, and it's super affecting. There's so much dehumanization to this war that when you get somebody who can communicate with us on the same level as us, it's extra informative and crazy.
Can I tell you the moment with him that just floored me? They were talking about that old cliche talking point that, the abuse breeds terrorists kind of thing. If you weren't a terrorist when you came in here, you will be when you leave, which was all over the place whenever discussions of closing Guantanamo Bay came up, right? And I had never, ever thought of it from the perspective of the innocent person being told that, and how insulting and demeaning that is to him, to suggest that of him.
Right.
That here's a fundamentally good person put through the worst ordeal imaginable, and that somehow that would deny him his fundamental goodness.
Yeah.
And you can see how much it hurts him, even after everything he endured, that when he was finally set free, they said that to him.
Ugh.
How much that hurts him. And that staggered me. I had never, ever thought of it from that perspective before. And that's the power of documentaries.
Yeah.
To expose you to an attitude like that.
Absolutely. Do you think that this movie, not this movie specifically, but like this style has become way more utilized in the age of like Netflix and like, I don't know. I feel like while this movie won an Oscar and people went to theaters to see it, like now there's like one of these types of movies like every week on either Netflix or Hulu or HBO. And I was just curious if you think like that there's like more of an assembly line to this type of film now, because it's like such a formulaic situation.
It's like one of those things where like here there's intentionality behind it, but then it's so successful that it just becomes the de facto style. So I found an interview with Gibney where he's talking about the interviews with the Bagram soldiers, which are all filmed against this muddy, dark background with really harsh lighting. And they are, they're oppressive, these interviews. They emphasize how miserable and haunted these people are. Gibney described it as like giving it the feeling of a prison.
Yeah.
And it also connects them with this kind of uniformity where they've all been enmeshed, cloaked by this darkness of what happened, what they did.
Yeah.
And so it's really effective here because there is intentionality behind it, because it's saying something more, but it also just looks like it is important and meaningful. So a dozen documentaries after this replicate the same thing without the same intentionality behind it. Right. And it just becomes a house style without meaning anything anymore. Yeah.
I think that like this style is way more prevalent than the style of King of Kong, like especially in today's world of documentaries. And on the one hand, it's probably way easier to like set out to create something like this, but on the other hand, like I wish there was more of the King of Kong thing. Like that,
it's serendipity.
There's one thing that came out last year that's very similar to King of Kong, which also has King in the title, and you kind of want more of that, but you...
What are you referring to?
A little Netflix miniseries called The Tiger King.
Oh, sure.
But yeah, I don't know. There's definitely an assembly line of these types of docs now, for better or for worse. So,
and I think to some degree this movie maybe goes too far stylistically.
Yeah, you think it's a little too harsh?
I think it maybe detracts from the power of its argument. Because the one moment that really sticks out clearly in my mind is when they talk about like the shock of capture or whatever.
Yeah.
And the intertitle flashes on the screen with the rock music behind it. And it feels, they're trying to get you into some measure of the experience of what it would have been like to have your senses assaulted in that way. But it comes off as pretty cheesy and sensationalist.
Yeah, a little bit for sure.
And that's not the only time that the movie does that. Its story is so powerful, it didn't need to rely as much on style as it did. But clearly that's what Gibney is bringing to the project. That's what attracts him about the medium is the ability to use those tools to express it. So I don't want to like blame him for that. The movie is incredibly powerful all the same.
Yeah. I guess the one other big thing I want to talk about is just like the lack of this like Iraq war content that we've seen it like subliminally in a lot of the other movies we've watched, but this was the first time in all the 23 movies we've watched where like we've actually looked the conflict directly in the face. Yeah. And this isn't a brand new conflict in 2007. It's been going on for years and years. And it's just really funny to me that like none of the movies we've talked about have really wanted to face this thing, at least in a very like on the nose way. They've all skirted around the issue.
They don't even make reference to it. Like Transformers is the only movie that even makes a passing reference to the fact that we're engaged in conflicts in the Middle East.
It's just not happening. And even if we discount the movies that don't take place in 2007, you still have like, you know, Stomp the Yard, Waitress, Hot Fuzz, Grindhouse, Bourne, Transformers. None of these movies, other than the tiniest sliver of Transformers.
What? Grindhouse also mentions it.
Oh yeah, so. You're right. You're totally right. Grindhouse did mention it. So Robert Rodriguez is speaking truth to power.
You know, on a related tangent, one of the things that this movie does that is so true to the experience that I remember from that time is the way the conflicts bleed together. Because this movie is about Afghanistan, Iraq, and the global war on terror, which are like kind of three separate things. In Afghanistan, we were specifically fighting the Taliban. In Iraq, we were specifically fighting Saddam Hussein. And then all over the world, we were also attacking terrorism, just primarily in those two theaters. And in this movie, it's all, they're all uniform.
It's right? All the war machine.
Dilawar is in Afghanistan, Abu Ghraib's in Iraq, Guantanamo's part of all three. And the movie makes the argument that like they really shouldn't even be distinct because it's the same agent acting in all of them. The U.S. military is the same military. It's the same policymakers.
As a 17-year-old, it all felt the same to me. Like I did not understand the difference between those three things, other than Iraq and Afghanistan being two separate countries. So yeah, I was also probably really ignorant.
It's just hard not to be.
It's really hard not to be. Yeah. So let's talk legacy of this movie.
Yeah. Before we move on to King of Kong, just to wrap this one up, obviously it's an incredible documentary and everyone should probably watch it. It's a tough watch, but as a reminder of the things that have shaped our current national attitude, the things that we will have to make amends for generations to come, you know, the dangers that we have to always be on guard against. It's definitely worth a watch.
Yeah. I feel like we have not reckoned with this at all. Like we are just completely sweeping it under the rug.
We chose to ignore it. 24 got a revival last year, man.
And I think that is a major, major reason for a lot of the problems that we have today. And we're doing that with tons of other things too that are contributing even more to the major problems we have today. But I think this is a big one, especially with like all the militaristic fetishization that I see out in the world, just out and about. Like, oh, there's another one of those fucking Spartans on the back of a truck. Like, I just think that we're just like, half of us are like, let's forget about it, and the other half are like, let's lean into it.
And there's even this shared DNA between this and over militarized policing that's been so at issue.
Yeah.
You know, it's all born out of the same instincts and the same sins.
Yeah. So watch the movie and confront your national identity if you're an American. And if you're not, then reckon with the global superpower.
God, I felt so ashamed watching it. I just felt such a palpable sense of shame.
I just don't get, like, when it comes down to it, was it just for show? It was like, hey, we are torturing people, so we're getting the information that we want. Like, is that what the movie's arguing? Like, because there's no point, because they get down to the fact that they did not get mostly worthwhile information from any of this. Like, the people that are being tortured just lie to say something in order to stop being put in pain.
But I think you also get the sense that the people up top, on the one hand, maybe it's that they don't care that they're lying because they want the numbers.
Right.
It looks good politically to say, we detained 60 terrorists or whatever.
And all of them said information that was valuable.
It could also just be that, the way information travels, they don't really get a sense of how ineffective it is until well after it's already been done.
I did really enjoy the clip of 24 where Jack Bauer hooks up electrodes to a guy's chest, and they're just like, look at how fucked up this is, because we're actually doing this.
It's insane. It's insane in that moment to be like, holy shit, this was one of the top television shows in the country.
I loved that show. Jesus.
And even at the time, people were like, this is fucked. And everyone else was like, nah, who cares?
But Jack Bauer's awesome.
So for all of these reasons and many more, Taxi to the Dark Side won Best Documentary at the Oscars.
Nice.
Certainly a perfectly deserving winner, although, spoiler alert, I had to give it to King of Kong, man.
Oh, of course. When you said one of these movies is 100%, I 100% assumed you were talking about King of Kong, not Taxi to the Dark Side.
No, it's Taxi to the Dark Side.
Did King of Kong even get nominated?
I don't think so. I didn't actually look.
Okay, so yeah, we're done with talking about Taxi to the Dark Side. We did our due diligence. Now,
we did. Let's talk about the sweetness.
Fun. Let's talk, but also America.
America, the human tragedy writ large.
The human tragedy writ large. Okay.
This movie, I hadn't seen this movie in 2007. I was into video games, and this movie got a lot of buzz in video game circles. Like IGN was like, hey, watch this documentary about Donkey Kong. So I saw it then. I hadn't watched it in 13 years. I don't know why not. This movie is so good.
It's amazing. So for the uninitiated, King of Kong, A Fistful of Quarters, is a documentary about a couple guys who hold the world records for various 80s arcade games. They compete in various competitions in order to have the claim to fame that they have the top record in a video game. Would you say that's more or less correct?
Yeah, we should talk about the two main guys.
Well, why don't you take it away? Because I had the privilege of explaining Abu Ghraib. So why don't you explain King of Kong?
In the one corner, we have Billy Mitchell. At the time of the documentary, maybe the most famous video game player of all time. A wunderkid who held multiple world records and had parlayed his fame as a video game player to a measure of professional success in all of his endeavors.
Can I interrupt you for one moment?
Yes.
This might be, in this entire season, the single most ridiculous moment of how much things have changed since 2007. That this dude was the most famous gamer compared to what it is
true.
now.
Like esports weren't a thing yet.
This is like a 40-year-old weird man who sells hot sauce and lives in Florida. And no one
Grace described her as looking like Zachary Quinto crossed with Peter Dinklage.
Yes, he does. And he's got a very Tom Cruise and Magnolia vibe as well.
He totally does.
Yeah. He's a total weird character, but it's just so funny to me that it's only been 14 years. And like now there's like thousands of Twitch millionaires. Anyway.
I know.
Sorry.
It's so insane. It's so insane. This movie is so insane and so captivating. So we got Billy Mitchell. And then in the other corner, we got our woebegone everyman, Steve Wiebe, a out-of-work engineer turned high school science teacher, father of two, dedicated, talented man.
Slightly on the spectrum, maybe, arguably.
Yeah, a little OCD, maybe a little, got a little Asperger's, has a little trouble social situations, and just wants once in his life to be the best.
It's so ridiculous. It's insane that they created this story and that it's real. It's amazing.
The thing that makes this documentary so good, the thing that every movie could watch from this documentary, is the way it builds up and fleshes out these two characters. They are so compelling. I started this documentary while Grace was out of the house. She came home about 30 minutes in. And I'm like, oh, I'm watching this documentary about competitive Donkey Kong. And she's like, yeah, whatever. She sits down to eat her lunch. She doesn't leave the couch for the rest of the movie. It's crazy how effective this movie is at making you care about and understand these people. Maybe not who they really were, but as characters in this story, it is a lesson to all storytellers.
Yeah, and it clocks in at like 82 minutes. And it's really an epic tale of people playing Donkey Kong. And there's lots of side characters as well. It's not just those two guys. It gets into the lives of like 5 or 6 other people and you feel like you really get a sense for who these people are.
I think a lot of that is born out of the way this was made. So the director behind this one is Seth Gordon. And that name might sound familiar because he is a big-time Hollywood movie director. He got his start in documentaries, but now he's best known for making big studio comedies like Horrible Bosses.
Yeah.
And he's like behind the Goldbergs on TV. Like he's just a big-time Hollywood big shot.
But he comes from humble roots.
But he grew up in New Hampshire playing at this arcade called the Fun Spot, which is featured in the documentary. This mecca for arcade fanatics.
Have you been to the Fun Spot? It's pretty close to your home.
I had only ever heard of it watching this documentary, had forgotten about it, and now have just heard about it again. But maybe I'll try and visit there
It's only
sometime.
like an hour away from you, I think.
You know, here's the thing about me and video games. I didn't start playing them till I was in college, basically.
Well, and you never played like arcade games.
I have no
totally
connection to
different-
these games at all.
It's a totally different world of video gaming than what we were growing up with.
I like Call of Duty. I don't think I could play Donkey Kong.
I've played like emulators of like those old games, and what they say in this movie is very correct. They're really hard. And it's like just punishing, and there's nothing fun about them to me. But maybe if you had one in your garage, it could be pretty fun.
They were designed to eat your quarters. You know, they were designed to turn a profit from your failure.
Unless you're Steve Wiebe. Oh my God. He is a virtuoso.
He clearly is. So Gordon, he's been going to the Fun Spot since he was a kid. He is getting his start making some documentaries. He wants to make a documentary about competitive gaming. He's really interested in this story. He wants to make it about the competition for Pac-Man, for Centipede, for Cubert, which is the only part that still remains in the movie with that old woman.
Right.
Who just rules. I love that
Just
old
so
woman.
brilliant that she's there.
So he starts, filming all of these people and all of these stories and collecting all these pieces together. He wants to make something like the documentary Spellbound, which had come out a few years before and was hugely popular, about spelling bees, but about video games.
There's a lot of these types of documentaries, especially around this time. Spellbound is great. There was also like Mad Hot Ballroom, which was about like New York City ballroom dance kids. Then there was also Wordplay, which is about a crossword competition. Like this was a total cottage industry. Like make a documentary about weirdo talented people in a competition of some kind.
The drama's already in place. The stakes are already in place. It's a no-brainer, really.
Yeah.
And it just so happened that as he was exploring this world, he happened upon a much, much more interesting story.
Yeah. This rivalry of sorts.
A friend of the producer knew this guy, Steve Wiebe. Knew a little bit about his attempt to get the Donkey Kong world record. So really early on, Gordon gets access to this guy who is challenging one of the longest held records in video game history, this Donkey Kong record.
Yeah.
And from there, the story kind of writes itself. In the editing room, they narrow it in on these two guys, Wiebe and Mitchell, and it's brilliant.
And it doesn't hurt the movie at all that these guys just perfectly fall into archetypes of like a movie. It's amazing. Like this guy, Billy Mitchell, like is the villain in the comedy movie that you've seen a million times. He really reminded me of Bill Murray in Kingpin. He's like this full of himself, like jackass, but he's also like kind of in control of everything.
Manipulative, slightly preening, even though he's not like attractive, like vain.
Yeah. I don't know, man. It's just a really weird character, but it's so specific. And he's come out and like argued that the movie lied about him and what he actually is like. But then I went on YouTube and I watched like videos from after the movie that were like published by him. Dude is a jackass. Like I hate to say it, but he is exactly like he is in the movie. He's a villain. It's crazy.
And there are moments that the documentary captures that are like undeniable. Him handing the tape to the old woman to deliver to them. You're just like, who does this? What is this Machiavellian bullshit?
Well, to me, the most affecting was that he has lackeys that we learned about. He has little lackeys that are at the competition that are
they're on the
reporting back
phone
to
with him all the
They're
time.
on the phone with him, and that one guy, Robert Kuh, the 30-year-old retired Donkey Kong player who moved to New Hampshire specifically so he could just hang out at Fun Spot, which like God bless him, do what you love. But there's a sequence in this movie where Weeby has come to the fun spot to take the title. He's going to take the record. And this guy, Robert Kuh, is like the ambassador of like cringy bullying. Like
passive aggressive, microaggressions.
Yeah, total microaggressions. And it's amazing to watch. It's such a study in like sniveling humanity that this guy, what he does. And again, maybe they edited it, but it seems very real. It seems very authentic and real.
There are some things you can't like that can't be faked. When he wipes off the TV before playing Billy Mitchell's record-breaking video,
yeah,
that TV didn't need to be wiped off.
No. Weeby's about to get the record, or he's about to get the kill screen on Donkey Kong, and this guy totally gathers a crowd in order to psych out Weeby. And it's so obvious because like
it says so in an interview.
Yeah, he wants Weeby to fail, and he walks around the entire arcade just telling everyone, hey, there's going to be a Donkey Kong kill screen in a moment if you're interested. He's trying to get as many people as possible, and Weeby just doesn't. It feeds Weeby. It's like the opposite effect. He like plugs in even more and gets the kill screen, and the guy, Robert Kuh, is so disappointed that he wins. And it's pitch perfect. It's amazing. Everything about it.
It's so exemplary of the benefits of being on the ground during the event, because there are moments of serendipity that you could not dream up. The moment that gets me at the beginning of the movie, when they're trying to get you to understand who Steve is as a person, and they're talking about all his failed dreams. You know, how he wanted to be a baseball player and how he wanted to be a musician. And he's sitting at this toy drum set, a drum set for a 5-year-old. His knees are above the drums. And he bangs out an incredible drum solo.
Yeah.
Like a really good drum solo on this toy that is not designed to do what he's doing. And you're like, this is a guy who puts in the work, who has the soul.
Yeah. He's got the magic touch. And on the flip side, Billy Mitchell presents himself as like this weird mystery man who like clearly he's like overcompensating for other things in his life because he's got this really like false personality. Like he kind of defaults to like the things that all weird American bullies default to, which is like super intense but seemingly inauthentic patriotism for the United States of America. Like he's just like loves like the imagery and iconography of like 1776 and like kind of wears it literally on his body with like a tie. And he explains at some point in the movie like, USA, I'm USA. Like he's just obsessed with
that's
USA.
my tag when I get high scores.
And it really does seem like he only likes it because like USA is like number one, and he's number one. He's got like weird business dealings in Florida with like a hot sauce company. The way he looks is just super false and inauthentic. Like these two guys couldn't be more different in the way they present themselves to the world. And like that's not to say that he isn't a talented Donkey Kong player or wasn't. Like I don't think he's like a fraud. I just think that he's choosing to control everything about his world.
He has invested so much into the persona that he has constructed. And part of that persona is that he is the best in the world at Donkey Kong.
And the minute that a guy comes along and says, "Hey man, I want to challenge you," he like physically cannot be like a good sportsman. He resorts to all this gross tactics to try to fake him out or try to make him feel weird. And like you're just imagining an alternate universe where he can like be pumped that somebody's trying to like take the title, and like he is a good member of the community, but like what makes this movie so intriguing is that he chooses to be an antagonist to this guy who's sportsmanly.
He makes himself the villain.
Yeah, this guy is like very kindly and sportsmanly trying to be like, "Hey man, I want to challenge you. Like it would be really fun, and we can like make a competition out of it." And he's just immediately goes into his little shell and his little shell of secrets. It's super engaging.
But the thing about the movie is, it's not just this relationship that's fascinating.
There's others too.
There's also Steve and his wife.
Steve and his wife is really good.
One of the most compelling portraits of a marriage I've ever seen.
Yeah, well, there's love there. There's real love there.
But a lot of pain, too.
Tons of pain. But she's, at the beginning of the movie, she's kind of like, "What the hell are you doing? This is weird." but then he gets some recognition, and I think she kind of realizes like, okay, this is actually pretty cool. Like the local news comes around when he breaks the record for the first time, and she's like, oh well, that got him through his whatever emotional turmoil, so like I kind of support it now. And by the end of the movie, she's like his number one fan. She like comes with him to the next competition, and she's like shitting on Billy Mitchell.
One of my favorite moments is when Billy's not going to play and Steve's like, oh yeah, okay, I guess. And she's like, no, that's wrong.
Yeah.
That is wrong.
Yeah. It's really cool. But you really get a portrait of like the love there. It's amazing. There's also the weird guy who runs the company.
Walter, who runs Twin Galaxies.
Yeah, and he's kind of skeevy, a little skeevy, but like ultimately has a heart at the end of the movie. Like he does a lot of weird skeevy shit, but he seems to kind of want to be like the Obi-Wan of this world.
Yeah, he's like found himself in a position he could never have imagined that has never been tested in this way.
Yeah. But at the end of the movie, he like apologizes. He's like, I'm sorry, we were such bitches to you.
Well, and the whole story about how this entire organization, this infrastructure was corrupted from within by its need to have heroes,
right?
To have narratives, to have stories, is fascinating.
Yeah.
Because
fascinating.
True or not, the arc of the story is that Steve, whether or not he wins the record, shows that he is a good person, and that makes a difference. It makes a difference with everyone he meets, with Walter, with the lawyer, even with Brian, the dweeby fun spot guy.
And his kids and his students and his wife.
With his students.
Yeah.
And so seeing those transformations is fascinating and compelling, and seeing how much good his acts of goodness do for this organization that had become corrupted without it even knowing it.
Right.
Without it even realizing what had happened to it. And here, a person just being decent has the ability to change, to create change. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's an amazing movie. It's really plucky, the whole movie. It's like, it seems kind of like cobbled together in like a really retro way, and like it's not slick at all. Like it's sort of the opposite of Tiger King, which had all these like slow-mo shots and like crazy music drops. Like this movie is like, it's got some funky little music drops where it's like kind of tongue-in-cheek 80s nostalgia, but like it really does seem like it was edited on like a tape deck or something and like submitted like on on a low budget quality situation. So it made me yearn a little bit for like discovering these types of movies, or like these types of movies getting popular, because now, like we were talking about before, there's like a churning out machine of these kinds of things. It's
and these nostalgia tie-in niche market, nerd market documentaries come out every other day online.
Yeah.
But at this moment, it was something special. And because of that, because people didn't know what it was, because it wasn't a known quantity, they were able to find a story that they probably would have been closed to them today.
I mean, and it made a career for the director, like a huge career. Yeah, nowadays, that Walter guy would probably have his own YouTube channel, and he'd be like, why would I let some other people come in and film? So, super interesting.
I thought it'd be fun to do a little records check-in.
Well, no, I went on a deep dive after this. I highly recommend, if you like this movie, watching the YouTube videos of these guys, because they still interact. They are still out there, like as recently as like 2 or 3 years ago. And it's really funny to see them age and like just what they're doing now. And they talk about the movie too. So it's pretty interesting.
And both of them have said that they're on much friendlier terms than the movie would indicate.
Which is it's so funny, because they basically only meet once in the movie, and they exchange 3 words. The whole movie's about this rivalry. They don't talk at all. They never meet, except for one time when Billy's a total prick. He like hovers around him. It gave me very heavy.
He has that amazing comment where there's like, some people I won't talk to.
Remember when Trump hovered around Hillary at the debate? He was just like like, I think he watched King of Kong and learned that move from Billy Mitchell.
A big centerpiece in the movie is Steve Wiebe goes out to Fun Spot. This is his first attempt to challenge Billy to play live. While there, he breaks 1 million. He's the first person to do it live. He had done it earlier on his tape run, but people didn't believe that recording. They thought there might have been an issue with the technology, with the cabinet that he used. But he does it again. He repeats the performance in front of the crowd, in front of the sniveling guy drawing in people to try and distract him. He breaks the million. And almost as that's happening, while he is at Fun Spot, which is like maybe a weekend, Billy Mitchell sends in a tape of him crushing the score and retroactively stealing the first to a million from Steve.
Which is such bullshit because Steve had already broken the record earlier, but then they called him out on a technicality because it wasn't live.
Right, and now a tape is
now
sufficing
they
for
give
someone
him
like
total
Billy Mitchell.
Mistreatment. It's so ridiculous.
Yeah, and you can see how much it hurts Steve, and it's one of the most heartbreaking moments in the documentary. It's right at the middle, where it's the low point, sort of.
Yeah.
After the fact, in fact, very recently, like in 2017, Twin Galaxies made the decision to remove all of Billy Mitchell's Donkey Kong records. They said that they had found conclusive evidence that the videos that were provided to them were achieved using emulation software instead of actual arcade machines.
Yeah.
And so that video featured in the movie, videos that were subsequently sent in, were disqualified.
Yeah.
Now, Weeby is not the number one in the world. He's 11th in the world right now for Donkey Kong. But he will always now be the first person to break 1 million on Donkey Kong. So I think it's just a nice ending.
I think it's worth noting that Walter had left that company by then. He was no longer in charge. So maybe some new blood was like, fuck Billy. But yeah, that's very good for Weeby. I'm glad he gets a happy ending.
I read the Roger Ebert review of the movie, and he liked it, but he's also like obvious disdain for video games, which is well documented, kind of drips through at every level. And when you get to the end of the review, you realize one of the things that's really bumming him out about it is that Billy effectively wins at the end of the documentary. You know, we get that little epilogue there, but then he's like, and I just looked it up and Billy Mitchell got an even higher score. So it's nice to know, for Roger Ebert's sake, that there was a little bit of justice in the world. And the story does have a happy ending even today. A happy ending that, in theory, can never be upset.
This is like ripe for a musical on Broadway. I'm really surprised they haven't done it.
There was a musical, like a fan-made off-Broadway unlicensed one, but there was a musical.
The full treatment. Broadway.
That would be
awesome.
awesome.
It would be really good. And then the songs would write themselves.
There's also been talk about doing some kind of fictional recreation or like a sequel or something like that. You know, not a documentary, but something involving this story and these characters.
I mean, you just wouldn't be able to top what's in the reality. That's why it has to be like a fantastic musical, because that's the only way to bring weird new life. Like, you can't recreate this. It just wouldn't be worth it. They're doing that with Tiger King, and I just don't understand why.
Well, we should write the musical, you and I.
Yes.
We'll get cracking.
Sounds good. No, I could see the songs. There'd be the song about Steve's failures. There'd be
his I Want song, where I just want to be the best.
Song. Yeah, it's like basically Hamilton, but with Donkey Kong instead.
Oh man, what a movie though. Grace's comment afterwards, having seen only the second 2/3 of it, was just like, that is a tremendous piece of art.
Yeah.
Like, she couldn't even describe it as a movie.
Yeah, it's really good. And I'm happy I've watched it now. I'd been meaning to watch it forever, so finally. Let's talk 2007 tech. I don't really have any. Honestly, like, obviously Taxi the Dark Side was like in rooms and archival footage, so it's kind of hard for me to be like, there's some tech. And King of Kong seemed to be like stuck in like 1987.
Yeah. They
They all use VHS in order to prove the records. I feel like 2006, you could have sent in like a mini DV or something. I don't know, but
Right.
it's all these like late 30s guys who clearly grew up in the 80s
and have their VHS camcorders.
They have extreme Arrested Development. So not any 2007 tech, unfortunately.
There's definitely some themes though.
Okay, let's talk themes.
We've talked about the shadow of 9/11 before. Obviously, that is a massive part of Taxi to the Dark Side.
Yes.
It's so much so it's sort of not even worth pointing out. But I also thought it kind of shows up in King of Kong, particularly in Billy's persona. You talked about his whole like USA posturing. Feels very reactive to me.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if it's like the zeitgeist or if it's the toughness. I don't know what it is. I think it's just like a default that you can use in order to project this like all-American attitude. I don't know. It's weird and like maybe a little toxic,
Oh, for sure. The big theme by far, though, that runs through both of these is institutional corruption. That's
Yes, absolutely.
all of what Taxi to Dark Side is about, and it's a lot of what King of Kong is about with the entire Twin Galaxies storyline.
Yeah, Steve tries, but he can't get past this stupid institution of the Twin Galaxies.
That this institution that has become so invested in the mythology that it helped create that it
Right.
can't see the truth.
Yeah.
What I thought was really interesting about that in particular is that institutional corruption has been super prevalent in a lot of the movies we've talked about. It might be like our third or fourth most mentioned theme this year. But I think these are the first two movies that we've watched that have really explored why the institutions became corrupt,
Mm.
which is such an interesting dimension and so important to understand.
Yeah, for
You know,
sure.
not to other it, not to externalize it, but to understand like how this is the trajectory of most institutions and you really have to watch out for it.
Yeah, I guess usually it's just kind of like this is the way it is. They don't it's because it's, you know what, it's hard to summarize that, especially within the framework of like a narrative story. It's like, why bother? Like you're more invested in like the characters and them overcoming their personal obstacles. But you know, King of Kong manages to create this entire world in the span of like 80 minutes, and it's the most enthralling thing ever. So no one has any excuses anymore. Maybe it's because it's way easier to do it in a documentary context because your characters are allowed to speak directly to the camera.
I think there's that. I think there's also the fact that that work's already been done effectively. There was a reason these institutions became corrupt. That is part of the story inherently. When you have to manufacture that reason, that's a work of creation that can be kind of difficult.
Yeah.
It also doesn't necessarily serve the narrative to understand why obstacles are obstacles if it's not relevant to how the hero will overcome them.
Because, yeah, the whole Twin Galaxies being corrupt has no real effect. Like, it's not like Steve Wiebe wants to, like, conquer Twin Galaxies. He just wants to get the world record. Like, the fact that it's corrupt is just shitty for him.
And ultimately, his arc isn't even really about getting the world record. It's about recognizing his value as a person and what is special in his life.
The other one I wanted to mention was something you've talked about a couple times, and this is really only for King of Kong, but the idea of someone being the best at something.
Sure.
Which is a very prevalent thing we've seen in a lot of the movies that we talked about. And
Nobody's
obviously it's the focus of King of Kong. It's all about, they talk about it many times. Like, it's the most important thing is to be the best at something. But I think the movie kind of proves that that's not necessarily the case. Like, life is more what you make of it.
You could also argue that that's present in Taxi to the Dark Side in the way that all detainees were treated as equal. You know, every suspect was the worst terrorist.
True.
There was no middle ground. There was no gray area.
Yeah, they do say, like, everyone in Guantanamo is the most ruthless killer out there, even though that's, like, a total lie. But yeah, it's extreme. It's extreme humanity, I guess. Cool. What a two-movie doozy. Really, really strange, but...
I'm so glad we've been doing these documentary episodes once a season. They've been such a treat.
They're fun. I mean, it's a bummer that when we did it for Paris is Burning, we didn't get the double feature with American Dream, which got added to Criterion Channel like a month later. I was so upset about that.
Hey, you win some, you lose some.
It's true. It's true. So, yeah, that is it. Next week, we're going to be doing our very first live episode. First ever live episode together. Not live, like, sorry, I should rephrase that. Our first episode where Ben and I are in the same room because Ben is going to drive all the way down here to Pennsylvania to visit me, apparently. And he's going to bring a microphone. I don't know. We haven't really worked out how that's going to work, but we'll make it happen. And
it'll be great because we'll be in the same room, look at each other in the face.
It's kind of ironic, though, for that to be our first time ever doing it together because we're going to be talking about the film Into the Wild, which is the story of a man who goes into the wild all by himself. So, yeah, really looking forward to that. And maybe we'll go on like a hike or something before so that we are in the mood for Into the Wild.
We'll get out into the wilderness.
Maybe I was thinking, should we record in the wilderness? Like if we brought microphones and a laptop out to like,
You know, it's already
woods?
going to be less than our normal standard of quality for audio because we won't be able to edit it as much. So yeah, let's just throw in a bunch of background noise.
it would be kind of funny. I don't know.
I don't hate that idea.
If we just recorded on an iPhone, like in the forest
No, we hike out with the mic and the
with
computer.
the mic and the laptop. Okay, maybe we'll do that. So yeah, tune in for that. Hope you enjoyed this discussion of docs. Once again, please follow us at BttM Pod, and please give us that 5-star review if you enjoyed this episode, because we want that. We want that cachet.
Help us grow. We've hit a little bit of a plateau. We'd really like to see more listeners join the community, and the only people who can help us do that are you.
And Ben just pointed like he's Uncle Sam at me. He pointed at me, but he was meant to.
But I was
at you.
pointing at the world
Right
of people
Yes.
listening.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you to Andy Gagnon for our music and Jackie Saltzman for our artwork.
Yes.
And with that,
For Back to the Movies, this has been Nat.
I'm Ben, and we'll see you next week when we go back to the movies.
In your time at the board game store, did you meet any personalities similar to the ones exhibited in this film?
So many. You know what my thought was watching the movie? I'm a really nerdy dude. I love video games and board games and toys and comic books and whatnot. But I watched this and I'm like, at least there are still some bastions of nerddom left to which I have not yet sunk.